being conscripted into the military. 1945 and the end of the war, that all stops. Most women go back to the kinds of roles that they were doing before. But that doesn't mean that they forget. And it doesn't mean that they don't particularly tell their daughters about that as they're growing up. So 20, 25 years down the line, I think that does feed into second wave feminism, to the women's liberation movement at the end of the 1960s, if you like, that kind of folk memory of what women had done before. And I really don't think that's something that people would have predicted in 1939, 1940.
But there were clearer things like the NHS coming out of it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one of the changes that comes out of the war that you probably could have predicted by about 1940, 1941 is what the government now would call a kind of, if you like, a sort of a levelling up, a sense that we do need, if we're going to ask people to take part in, to sacrifice all kinds of things, not just life, but all kinds of elements of daily life, to a second total war in a generation, we need to offer something a little bit more than what they have now. People weren't happy in 1939 to be told that they were fighting to keep things the same, because for many, the 1930s had been really, really grim. So they had to be offered more. There was a gradual recognition among Parliament that there was, in the government, that there was going to have to be some degree of social change. And what you end up with, which was a surprise to them, is the election of a Labour government in 1945, the creation of the welfare state, and crucially, the creation of the NHS.
And do you think there's a role for technology to help in this?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I think, I guess, in a general sense,
I asked
you'd
that
say...
because, for example, I was in a care home filming on Monday, and they were talking about potentially having to close, and they had a big sort of Skype, huge screen that the older people there with dementia, who it's really important that they still speak to their families, that they were thinking about, that in the past they wouldn't have been able to keep that open, but because of technology they
absolutely. Can. And, as academics, we're seeing our behaviour changing because, just today I said, someone invited me to a conference, I said, actually, I can't go, I will do it by webinar. And we've seen a huge upsurge in these kind of, video conferencing facilities. And actually, that won't necessarily be a bad thing because we've got to remember, we also have a climate emergency, which is in the longer term, going to be, considerably more dangerous to our species. And so, it's possible that out of this will be, some kind of trigger mechanism which leads us to think again about how we go about things in a way that, is not producing all this carbon in the environment and all this pollution.
Though we do still crave face-to-face as humans, don't we? We need that interaction.
So when you and I have a chat on the video and I turn that way, you don't know what I've seen. You don't know what I've just experienced. There's a limit right now, at least in our technology and what it can offer. You and I also don't get a chance to have that jolt of emotion. You have a feeling and I get a little bit of it as a mirror feeling. It's harder, much harder to have that virtually. So, but we can do some things. And so self-isolating, you can call the parents you haven't talked to recently. You can make a donation.
More time to do that.
Exactly, yeah. You can check in on someone, have the groceries arrived? How are you doing? You're on your own too. So being somewhat nosy neighbors online, that can be a service we can offer each other. And Richard Layard says that one way to reduce loneliness is to feel useful. If you have a way of feeling useful to other people, you feel less lonely.
And do any of you think that this experience will tell us anything or tells us anything about being British, about the British character?
I don't know about being British, but about being human. And actually, one of the things that has been very striking about this in the context of the political context of sort of neoliberalism and so on, is that we suddenly find in the face of this sort of impending catastrophe that the state has to do stuff, and the stuff that you can't do with private industry and so on. You have to have socialised approach to it, and you have to work together. But I think one really important point to get across is that for many of us, for people like us, it'll probably be fine, as fine as it can be. But, those people in society who don't have access to technology, who don't have the social networks and so on, are going to be really badly hit. And those people need to be looked after. And